this is kind of fun because this is a presentation just for mayors. And so it's really easy for me to say good evening, Your Worship, and thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to co-host the meeting tonight with George Cuff. A little bit about who we are first. So Expertise for Municipalities is a not-for-profit corporation that is focused on developing excellence in municipalities, and it's staffed by people who have been staff of various municipalities themselves, and they offer services such as mentoring staff. I know that Peggy's been working on some really interesting municipal organization restructuring in a number of municipalities. I guess would Calendar be in the north? in the near north, maybe you would call it, down there. My name is Paul Cassan. I'm a partner at Wishart Law Firm, and I've been practicing municipal law for 26 years now. That went by quickly. I certainly didn't go to school thinking that I would be a municipal lawyer, but fell into it and love it, and practice primarily in Northern Ontario, but certainly looking forward to an invitation from Mayor Mullen in Sterling to come home one day. So George is, I think, with us. George has prepared a presentation for us tonight specifically dealing with the role of the mayor, and he's going to speak about that. We've got about 50 questions, and George has seen those questions and is going to answer some of them. This is going to be the first of a series. So E4M is going to present George and maybe some other excellent leaders. Starting, I think, in the fall, we'll take the summer off so that you can do more important things as we get to go outside and be with our friends and our ratepayers again. Now, there is a very exciting announcement to make, and that is that George has a book coming out soon called The Mayor. And E4M has asked me if you can email your name and email address to support@E4M.Solutions. They're going to have a draw for 5 autographed copies of George's book. I don't know if George heard me say that, but I'm hoping that he'll cooperate with that. So without further ado, I'm going to hand this over to George. And if you have questions as we're going through, please put them in the chat. I know we've got an hour, so George has got about 4 hours worth of wisdom to share with you. And so in an hour, over to you, George.
Thanks very much, Paul. I trust everyone can hear me, including the people that are simply on a telephone line. And hopefully you'll find it interesting enough to stay with us for the hour or hour and a bit. I have a whole series of questions that folks have sent in advance and that the E4M people have sent to me, and they make either a very good opportunity for me to respond or to start writing articles for Municipal World, so I cover some of them. If you're not a subscriber to Municipal World, you ought to be. I've written now 400 articles on topics like the one we're talking about over the next hour. So if you want more information on the role of the mayor, on the impact of the mayor on council, on dealing with council members that aren't the easiest, on relationship with the CAO, responsibilities vis-a-vis boards and committees, all of that are covered in a variety of articles. And if you don't find it, drop me a note and I'll probably send it to you. What I've noted over the years is that I have actually aged somewhat. So I just put up this slide just for the heck of it and created it only in the last month, I think. It starts at the top left and goes across, and it sees pictures of me in a range of ages from 1968 to 2021, which is the bottom right, all of which are probably somewhat inflated in terms of their importance, or at least their importance to the person who's being featured. So I went through a period of time when I was the mayor, while I was, by the way, still a management consultant. Spent 12 years as mayor and as the story goes, I've also spent time as a municipal administrator for 2 years and as a consultant and in my own consulting world for 42 years, 37 of which in my own firm. So it's been a lengthy career. These pictures range from downtown Calgary, which is where I went to a course with the Royal Bank, top left, to a course that I taught in Jakarta, Indonesia, a small community of 12 plus million people with mayors and managers from Southeast Asia, many of which, by the way, were not in a democracy, so that made for an interesting challenge. All the way down to the bottom left with my friend Pastor Mickey Modi from a small village in Romania, and they're the host of the children's camp that we support, and there's a slide at the very end that tells you how to connect to it if you're interested. To the bottom right, which is a picture in a nearby Edmonton community, not my own, but close by. In terms of introduction, mentioned the 42 years, mentioned the fact that I've experienced at both sides of the table. Also president of your equivalent of AMO, which would be AUMA and also FCM. Have authored 400 articles plus since 79, also 10 books, including a fictional one on what goes wrong, the trials and travails of management and council. And then one recently during COVID called Tucker Goes to City Hall. And I also have written one, as Paul has announced, called The Mayor. And it will be available, we think, in the next, I would say 2 months, 3 months maximum. It should be a good read for all of you, given your positions as mayor. You'll have a good insight by the time you've gone through that book. I've also spent time consulting with, as it turns out, I've done 450 major reviews and 700 seminars. So that's a long space in terms of career. Covered all 10 provinces, all 3 territories, some international work, all of which is to say that I'm old and so far not quite over the top in terms of age and ability, but I'm probably getting there. I'm going to go through these slides pretty quickly because I've got a whole series of, I've only got 12 slides, so you're not going to be encumbered by slides. Hopefully they're relatively punchy and they'll be supplemented by the book when you do buy that. Some of these I just simply created off the top of my head, or as someone once said, off the cuff. Challenges in being the leader. Staying committed to what and who brought you to the dance. You know, and I say that because it's so fundamental, and yet it's also runs perilously close to breaking for a whole lot of people because they convince themselves about how important they were before they got elected. They convince themselves of their fantastic personality. They convince themselves that they're there to serve town office, district hall, city hall, and they forget about the fact that they're actually brought there by the folks in the community who wants to stay connected to them, but the mayor sometimes becomes so important that they have a hard time getting their body and their head into the same car. Leading requires breaking new grounds. Most people are far more comfortable following well-worn tracks. I'll tell you a real simple equation. If you have come into public life and come into office as the mayor and you have yet to change anything, i.e., you've never asked, well, what policy are we following? And why would we be following a policy that's now 12 years old? Or what procedure bylaw directs what we do in terms of meetings? And is that written in stone? Has it been brought down by Moses? Is it part of the Municipal Act? Or can we change it? The answer is, of course, you can change it because it's yours, if it's your procedure bylaw. If you've never asked a question with regard to your committee structure and why you appoint people to this host of agencies, boards, and committees called ABCs, you've never asked which ones they are, why you're appointing. You're just concerned about getting people appointed to them, but you don't really know what exactly it is they do, and your staff have never told you. Those are all leadership issues. If you're comfortable sitting in the mayor's chair but not asking the question, you really ought to be asking the question, am I leading, or am I simply following other well-worn tracks by previous leaders? It's a challenge to all of you, and I hope I make some of you feel somewhat uncomfortable and decide that you really want to go back to your office now and go back and take a look at what it is you are doing as leaders of your community. You're going to find out that leading requires choices to be made. And choices as simple as who do I appoint to a particular board or committee in terms of who do I recommend, choices to be made in terms of do I attend this event or do I not? Do I go to my child's 15th birthday or do I go to a budget meeting tonight? Those are choices that have obviously significance, both internally for people's personal choices, as well as they carry with it the potential to offend others inside and outside council. Leaders recognize that regardless of their due diligence, you can still be wrong. You try not to be, but over time, and if you stay long enough in public life, you can find out that, yeah, maybe you were wrong on particular issues, that time has proven somebody else to have been right and not you. You try your best, and you realize that if you're following a really good process, by and large, you're probably going to get to the right product or the right result. I'm going to come back to that because that relates to some of the questions that I've been asked to respond to. In terms of roles of the mayor, you provide leadership to council. You're not the one-man band or the one-person band, but you do provide leadership. You do have an opportunity to guide, to suggest, to inquire, all of which are leadership roles. You're not there as a dictator. You're not there as I'm the mayor and the rest of you aren't important. At least I hope you're not. But you're there to provide leadership to council by questioning, by making suggestions in terms of what could be done. All of that is leadership functions, and I'll talk a bit more about that. You're there to reflect the best interests of the community as a whole. And in fact, in many pieces of legislation across Canada, those are the exact words that are used in one or two of the first statements of the Municipal Act, which talks about council providing guidance and governance to the community as a whole. And that means you're there to try to discern their best interests as a community. You're there to try to ensure that the best interests are what is reflected in the decisions made by the council. And they aren't simply the best interests of the people that show up on Facebook or other forms of social media like LinkedIn and others. You're there to attend to official functions. Do you have to go to all of them? No. Can you delegate something to the deputy mayor or to another member of council? Absolutely. Should you do that? Actually, you probably should. Particularly, you should go on a 2 or 3 week holiday, sometimes longer, sometimes a couple of times during the year. And you find out, by the way, that the place that existed before you got there will continue to exist in your absence, which also, by the way, is a good sign of good leadership. I mean, if you're providing effective leadership, then you'll have people that can follow you and will know what it means to be an acting mayor in your absence because you provided good guidance and your administrative staff are doing the same. So you're there to attend functions, the drop of the puck at the hockey tournament or the ball game or whatever it happens to be, or the 50th anniversary, which you try desperately not to miss. There are key functions in any community. Annual parade day is one of them. Those are significant events. And yes, by and large, you ought to be there unless there are good personal reasons why you aren't. You're there to guide policies and programs. You don't need to write them, which I think mayors and councillors ought not to be doing. But you can certainly question and you can certainly ask whether or not your administration is doing anything with regard to a redraft of a policy that obviously isn't working. You're there to look at threats to the well-being of the community, to ask the questions. You know, I just flipped on my television at some point this afternoon to take a break from what I was doing at my office. And I find out that there's a major disaster in South Florida with a whole apartment tower having collapsed, and they're fearful that up to 100 people might have been killed in the process. I'll guarantee you that, and in fact, the mayor was quoted, I'll guarantee you that there's a whole lot of council members and mayors across the U.S. that are looking, and Canada, I hope, that are looking at their structures and saying, you know, what's the threat to the well-being of our community in terms of the construction of these buildings that might be close to the river, the lake, whatever. There are obviously threats that are happening, which we've seen more south of the border than north, but we're likely to see them as well, which includes violence in our inner core cities and so on. Those are threats to well-being. They're all important roles that a mayor needs to be paying attention to in terms of understanding what's our process, what policy do we follow, what am I allowed to speak to? And point 6 is how important is it for me to keep council informed? And I would say that you need to have what I call protocols, including as well as policies, but protocols. And one of the protocols would be that the mayor, when the mayor comes into contact with any new information, the mayor will inform all of council within 72 hours of the information that the mayor has become aware of. That should be a protocol. And if you're not entirely sure what those should look like, drop me a note and I'll send you a copy of several protocols. A mayor is there to maintain confidence between members of council who might come into your office and want to talk to you privately, and providing that it is a topic in which you can continue to maintain a confidence, you obviously do that. Similarly with your administrator, CAO, you might need to maintain a confidence with that person. Somebody might share with you the fact that they're really struggling at home in terms of their marriage, their significant other, their family relationships. Those would be confidences that you would maintain, as well as confidences that happened during the course of your council term, i.e. meetings that wherein you vote to go in camera, and whatever you talk about in camera, of course, you keep in confidence until such time as council has provided approval to take it out into the public. Otherwise, there's nothing in the statement of the role of the mayor that says that you're the one that gets to divulge information and nobody else can. You need to be very careful with regard to that. You're there to promote the purpose of local government, to ensure that the community is aware of what role you have. There should be a statement on your website that talks about what's the purpose of our municipality, what's the purpose of our council, what's the parameters within which we operate and function. We're there to encourage public involvement, which I think is a critical role of the mayor. How do we get the public involved in local government business? How do we ensure that what we're doing is public and is transparent? How do we ensure that the public knows that they can come to council meetings? They likely won't, by the way. Some will, and some might come repetitively. But how do we ensure that the public is aware that those meetings are open to them? And then the fact that you're a representative, not of yourself, not of your business, not of your past, you're a representative of the community. Anywhere you go, you represent the best interests of your community, whether it's a very small community or somewhat larger, it doesn't matter, you're it. You walk outside your home in the morning, I'll guarantee you that you're in the spotlight. You go downtown, you're in the spotlight. You walk into any conference hall, you're in the spotlight, which ought to be a reminder to you that your behavior is obviously on display at all times. What are some of the blessings? Well, the blessing is the fact that you're in the eye of the community. You've gone from being a person whose voice carried no weight whatsoever, typically, and all of a sudden everything you're saying is important to the community, or at least you perceive it is, and quite frankly, it likely is. You're in the eye of the community. You get to do things that the community will see as being important and setting a standard. So in my own community, our mayor over the last 12 or 14 years has just announced he's stepping down and went by me as the longest serving mayor. I had a contract out on him, but it didn't work. But in any case, he's been in the eye of the community and he's done a very effective job, and I've commended him more than once with regard to that. He's capable of rallying the community, and he's in their eye on a regular basis. You have the blessing of an audience. I mean, a lot of people come up with a lot of good ideas, but they do so into a silence that's deafening. You have an audience on virtually every speech you're going to give as mayor, which has both a blessing and a curse to it, obviously. But the blessing is that you can impact and influence others to follow. You have an opportunity to do something special or unique. So that came back to me full circle in the last month, when I got an email from a lady who said, you were the mayor when I was living in Spruce Grove, Alberta. She said, I'm now living in Red Deer. And when I was living in Spruce Grove and I gave birth to a young boy, you sent us a welcome to the world letter as mayor, and you challenged our son to do good things for the community in which he lived and so on. Anyway, it was a letter that I wrote for every child born during the time that I was mayor, which was a 12-year period. And she was writing to me to say how much she appreciated the letter. And here's how her son had turned out. And so I've just now sent her a copy of Tucker Goes to City Hall and a nice note to accompany it. I was really hit by that note from her and considered it quite special. So you too have an opportunity to do things that are past the post in terms of something that's special or unique. The blessing is that you could create a round table of concerned citizens. You can draw them together. I find, by the way, the longer I do this kind of consulting work, is that boards and committees are starting to lose their oomph, their cachet, if you like, and are being replaced by other forms of public participation, some of which I've written about. Creating a roundtable to talk about the challenge facing the community with regard to water supply, with regard to sewage treatment, with regard to developing a better downtown, whatever it happens to be. The mayor's one could have the mayor's roundtable on, fill in the blanks, and people would show up, as opposed to any citizen trying to do the same and nobody shows. The mayor's blessing is forging new paths, is looking at where have we been, what could we do in terms of relationship with neighboring communities, what are we doing in terms of developing a new recreation or cultural facility, what are we doing in terms of developing a trail system to the next community, what are we doing that's different that people will reflect back on and say, boy, you know, the mayor that we had in such and such an era did first-class work for all of us. Some traits of successful mayors. Obviously, the ability to communicate, and I talk about that regularly, but, you know, as a mayor, you don't have to be the most articulate person ever, but you do have to be prepared to stand up and communicate with passion your love of the community. Hopefully, you can write, and if you can't, you've got staff that can, and so that you can send a note off to somebody who's really impacted you in the community, somebody that's provided good leadership to their board or committee and is now stepping down, all of those things. You have an opportunity to communicate. You have hopefully the ability to lead, and that means many things, obviously, but the ability to set a new path, the ability to stand up in front of a crowd and say, no, I'm responsible, I'm the mayor. I mean, and I'm the same person that's taking credit for things when things are going well, things aren't going so well. So as you found out in this last era, we've got premiers across Canada who've seen their popularity plummet, have gone from a high to a low overnight because of people's disgust with the pandemic and the concern over the quality of leadership that we're finding. Well, you know, some of that is absolutely incidental to the person in the office, but I'll guarantee you that everyone in office now across Canada is going to wear it. So the question is, how do I lead? How do I communicate to people in my community? A quality mayor understands the need for role clarity. And a whole series of questions that I received tell me that the two words that have sustained me for the last 42 years are role clarity, and they're still apparent today. I could go across Canada doing seminar after seminar about the need for role clarity, and I would have sellout audiences all hearing it as though they heard it for the first time. I've got mayors still trying to be the managers of public works. You aren't. I've got mayors who are trying to be the administrator. You aren't. I've got mayors who are trying to be the clerk of the meeting. You aren't. Or the parliamentary procedure expert. You aren't. Or the engineer. You aren't. You're the mayor. And if you didn't want to be the mayor, step down and apply for a different job. You lined up at the wrong wicket if you're trying to be something you were in private life. That's not something you are in public life. Public life, you're the mayor. And that says I need to understand what that means, and I need to fulfill that role rather than some other role that I'm more comfortable with. Speaking of comfort, you're comfortable with power. You realize that your voice speaks much louder decibels than it ever did, that you have power to guide, you have power to influence. You don't have power to decide, at least very few things. And so your ability is your ability to persuade and to speak with authority and so on. And you're comfortable with that. You're not walking around saying, aren't I the greatest, Ali. You're comfortable with power in terms of using it quietly and persuasively. You also are a person of personal integrity. And again, I get called in time and again to resolve major problems within council of people that have gone past the post in terms of their personal integrity. They get themselves involved in stuff in which they know they have a conflict, and I'll speak about that briefly at the end. And they just, quite frankly, diminish their capacity in the eyes of the public simply by making terrible choices and presuming that the law does not apply? Well, the answer is you're much more on display than you've ever been. And your personal integrity will come to the fore very quickly. Character and integrity are what you can bring into a room and take it back out if you choose. But you can also lose them in the room. You're there as a bridge builder, somebody that can build a bridge between members of council. You can build a bridge between council and the administration. You can build a bridge with the mayors and councils of neighboring communities across the province, with ministers of the crown and a premier for whom you did not vote, but you're still able to build a bridge because you know that's what's the requirement of the job. You're the mayor of the community. You're not the political leader of the Conservatives or the Liberals or the NDP or any other party. You're there to build bridges that are going to be helpful to your community. And the final trait, and these aren't the only ones, you need to read the book, but the final trait is that you have some sense of timing. So what is the right time to leave as mayor? I had that discussion with our current mayor several months ago, and he decided to take some of that advice, I think, and has stepped down. I just said, you're far better off going when the applause is ringing than when you have a foot on your back. So you need to decide what's the right timing. And I would wish for all of you that you would decide carefully and not do it on the basis of, I don't feel like retiring. That has nothing to do with it. The question is, are you still adding value? Some of the fatal flaws of leadership includes a lack of humility. The fact that people are spending most of their time talking about I. When I speak to a mayor and they immediately talk about what I've done, I think about the fact that, you don't operate on your own. You don't decide things on your own. You aren't a majority of council. I don't care how big you are, how much volume your voice has. You're still not the majority of council. If you've got a council of 7, you need 3 more votes for anything to happen. You need to be able to say we as a council. I'm delighted with the council that we have. I'm humbled by the fact that I've been elected into this significant role called being the mayor, and I'm going to try to live up to it. A fatal flaw is the inability to share the glory with others. And again, leadership says that I'm able to provide some direction. I'm able to suggest new avenues and so on, ways of doing things. But I recognize that the only way we get there is by all of us pulling in the same direction. So I'm quite comfortable talking about the fact that not only is this council the ones that made that decision or moved us ahead, but also the past council, some of whom I might have campaigned against, or the past mayor. They've all done things. They've all helped the community in some way to grow. And so I'm able to share the glory with others. Fatal flaw is a lack of confidence, the sense that I'm not sure we can accomplish this or that. And so if you've got a lack of confidence, the fact that not very many people are following won't be of any surprise to you, because they sense that you're not confident in what it is you're doing. If you don't believe what the community is trying to do as one of its priorities, I'll guarantee you that spills over to everyone. When the decision is made, whether it was yours or not, you need to be able to step up and say, let's go for it. Let's tackle this. Let's decide that we're going to be the best we can be at whatever it is. The inability to say no is also a troubling flaw for a leader or for a mayor. There are times when you do need to say no, whether it's a request by a citizen for a particular reference to a project or reference for a job, or it's somebody that's asking you to do something that you know is beyond the post, that's a conflict of interest, whatever it is, you have to be able to say no, even though that's tempting to say yes. You have to be able to discern, to be wise, to ponder, and to say no. Rigidity says my way or the highway. Rigidity says I'm the only smart person in the room. Rigidity says, well, we made that decision when I first got on council 5 years ago, and if it was good enough 5 years ago, the world hasn't changed, we haven't changed, community hasn't changed, so obviously the issue has been decided, we're good. And the answer is what I just said was not true. The world has changed, community has changed, people around you have changed, you're the only one that's still trying to hang on and be brittle. You got to decide, no, I can move, we can change, we can adjust. And then the inability to apologize. There are people that go through life not being able to apologize to others. This is a should be built into your psyche. You should be able to say to others, you know, I did the wrong thing. You should, at the end of a council meeting, look around the table and say, so who did I tick off with one comment that I made, which I shouldn't have? And go over to that person and say, you know, I probably said the wrong thing. In fact, I'm sure I did, and I apologize. I mean nothing of ill toward you as one of my colleagues. And that's an important statement to be able to make that shows class and leadership. What are the challenges? Well, there's a whole series of challenges, obviously, to this role of mayor, and not all of you might experience them to the depth that somebody else might in a smaller community or in a larger community. And by the way, it's not easier being the mayor in a small community compared to a large, or vice versa. That's the question of how many challenges you face as a mayor in that particular community. So being the mayor means staying connected. You want to have a second term or a third term. The only way you actually even have that choice is your ability to stay connected to the audience. You know, good leadership is often defined as the small distance between leader and those following. When you say, let's go, you need to have a sense that the folks around you are all keen to go with you. You need to stay connected. You need to stay informed. And that means, I remember when I was mayor and I'd be consulting in Ontario and I'm living in Alberta, and I would say to our city manager, I'd say, Gary, whatever happens inside the organization, I presume you got your hand on it and you're quite capable of being our manager, and I'm not going to try to micromanage you. Whatever happens in the community that you think I ought to be aware of, you make sure that you let me know. And in those days, I think it was largely by phone. And I want to make sure that the only thing that I don't know would be what's happened in the 4 hours that it took me to get from the Pearson Airport to the Edmonton Airport. I don't want somebody at the Edmonton Airport standing in the waiting line for our luggage who's going to tell me something that happened in Spruce Grove that I should have been made aware of. That was my point. And we had a very good relationship. It's called No Surprises because I stayed informed. You need to be able to recognize the need to provide oversight and accountability. At the end of the day, anything that happens during your watch, as Edward Smith, the captain of the Titanic, found out, is on you. That's called accountability. It's on you. You don't defer to management. You don't say the clerk put me up to it, the administrator put me up to it, other members of council, whatever. No. That's part of your role, is to provide oversight, the one over principle to the organization, and accountability for whatever happens. You get all of the plaudits for all the good stuff. You're also going to be accountable for things that didn't go nearly as well. And that's being accountable for the actions of your council. For the decisions made during your term of office, you're it. You're going to get praise for a lot of the good things, but you're also accountable for everything else. Building and keeping relationships with councillors. If you're a council of 5, no, you don't just need 2 other votes. You need to capture 4 others. Now, you might not, and you might have split votes on a particular issue. I'm totally unconcerned about that, by the way. There's no great magic in having unanimous councils. I can't even find a unanimous family. I put an issue on the table at Thanksgiving and get people to talk about it, and they all argue with each other, and lo and behold with me. And I look around and realize they're either related to me or they're related to those who are related to me. And I think about that and I think, geez, I got all kinds of voices around this table, but that's what you have at a council table. But you can still build a relationship with these people. You can still inquire in terms of their family, their health, and so on. You can have a good discussion before and after a meeting. You need to build a relationship. You don't just need to count numbers and count heads. You need similarly to maintain a relationship with your administration. And that says to me that you understand with respect what they do. You understand that the administrator know the person is not asking you how to make a decision. If they are, by the way, you got the wrong administrator. You better deal with that. You need to build a relationship that's one of respect, it's cordial, and it's non-interfering. So if you've got senior staff members that want to go past the administrator and talk to you to get advice and direction, you'll know you've got a weak administration and they're disrespectful and you're feathering it. So you really got to ask yourself, why would I do that if I want a strong organization? The mayor needs to be building relationships with other communities. That's every one of us has got neighbors. I've got neighbors living next door to me. We've got neighboring communities. One of the things that I said when I became mayor is that we were going to find a way to build a relationship with our neighboring rural community and our neighboring urban communities. And we're going to build a relationship because it's going to be in our best interests. And I could give you all kinds of examples, which I think are in one of my books, that talks about why that was a blessing. It was a significant blessing to the community. I developed a relationship with the reeve or the warden or whatever you call it there of the county. And we ended up having a fantastic cost sharing agreement that came out of that. And building pathways to other levels of government, don't get in it. If you want to get into other levels of government, step down from being mayor and run for MPP or run for your MP position. That's entirely up to you. Just don't create animosity with whoever's in office today. Don't take a shot at them. Don't take a run at the premier or run at the minister of health or whatever because something happened during the pandemic. Provide suggestions, provide encouragement. At the end of the day, pat them on the back and say, well, good for you to hanging in there and so on. The fact that you used to be the MPP or you used to be the MP or you used to be the minister of, all of that's by the by, folks. You made a decision to step up to being the mayor, which I think is far more significant than being a member of the legislature or a member of parliament. And I have lots of good reasons for saying that. You're also the leader of all. A good mayor encourages fairness and civility in the organization and between each other on council. The mayor models before expecting the same of others. And if you're expecting people to reflect integrity, you're expecting them to reflect courtesy, you're expecting them to reflect a good model of discipline, you're expecting them to look professional when they come to a meeting as opposed to looking like they just climbed out from beneath the combine or the tractor, then you ought to be modeling that. Because after all, you're in charge of probably one of the biggest businesses in your community. You need to look the role. And that means, by the way, every time you step out in public, I used to joke, my wife used to joke and say that George is out there cutting the grass with his suit on because he's convinced that somebody might drive by and be having neighbors with them and know that he's the mayor. The mayor seeks the good of all. You seek the best for the community. You seek the good of all the people in the community. You're not appealing to one sector or another. A mayor uses power in a timely manner. And I'll speak to that in a moment with regard to when do you interject your comments at a council meeting. I deal with some mayors that are very quick out of the gate to tell council what it is they should think and how they should vote. I'm not one that buys into that very readily. So I'll talk about that. A mayor leads when others follow. A mayor takes up the cudgel and says, this is what we're going to do. This is where we're going to head. Are you with me? And others, generally speaking, if you've showed the fact that you're capable of leadership on other issues, you'll end up having an audience and a followership on this issue. Mayor doesn't pick sides. The mayor listens to both arguments at a council table. And the mayor says, you know, we've got some very good discussions, some very good arguments, and I'll be voting in favor of the motion. That's not picking sides. Picking sides is you campaigning for a particular cause, for you trying to diminish somebody else on council. That's picking sides. The mayor's prepared to change. The mayor's prepared to recognize that we live in a world of change. Not much stays the same. Hopefully your faith does, your beliefs do. Hopefully your treatment of others does. Hopefully your family stays approximately the same, maybe grows a bit. But you're prepared to change in terms of your views, in terms of how you hold a particular opinion on a particular topic. You're prepared to move in a direction that the council as a whole has decided is more preferable than to something else. And when the music stops, and it will, why thinking about this now is prudent? It's prudent because regardless of when the next election is, and I think for you it's another year or so, you need to think about, what if I'm no longer the mayor? When's the right time for me? And I talked about that a bit earlier. Think about it now. Don't wait until 2 months before an election. The music will stop. Eventually, this position that you're in called mayor does end. It took me one night to go from your worship to your wash-up. And fortunately, I made that change all by myself in terms of not having to have the public push me out the door. Who do you have at home? Who will be there when you retire or are retired by the public? You ought to be focused on that now. Your most important role in life is not being the mayor. your most important role in life is probably being a husband, a wife, a significant other, and a parent or a grandparent. And yes, it's wonderful to be the mayor. It's a great opportunity and a wonderful honor. Why it's preferable to leave to applause rather than silence, because when the music stops, you actually have a choice to make. Am I leaving while I'm on the top of my game? And yes, I've still got enough energy, but I don't have to go until the very end of my lifetime. I can actually decide to pass this on to somebody else who's going to have new ideas, more energy, and the community will be happy to support them. And then what steps can you take now? And that means to me that you're prepared to find other people to run for office. You're prepared to encourage councillors to think about the role. You're not going to endorse anybody because you ought not to do that as mayor. You've got too much clout and you'd rather not throw it away or give it away. So you can take some steps to make the transition a whole lot more comfortable. And then just before I get into some detailed questions, just to mention that my wife and I are involved in a mission to Romania, providing assistance in setting up a children's camp. It's a wonderful opportunity. It's rising up before our eyes. It's in the northwestern part of Romania. No, I'm not related. No, my family's not related. There's a whole other story to that. You can drop me a note and I'll send you the story. But you can go online to Roots in Romania and see a little video on what we're doing in Romania. It's both encouraging and fascinating. Unique part of the world. It's the Hungarian part of Romania, by the way. And then if you have any questions based on what I've just said, you want to challenge it, you want to have me speak a little bit more about it, you want to know if I've written an article on it, got a template on it, then you feel free to drop me a note and I respond to every note as far as I'm aware of that I've ever received. So Paul, that concludes the formal part of the presentation. Over to you, or do you want me to start on some of these questions?
Well, one thing I want to pick up on that you just mentioned, George, and I want everybody to know it. I know that you sometimes tell us about it, but you didn't today. And that is that the proceeds from your book actually go to help this children's camp. And I think that's a wonderful support that you're giving. And I'm certainly very thankful for the support that your books have given us. So, George, we did get about 50 questions, and we've sent them to you. And so if you can maybe summarize and go through some of those. I've got some favorites that I'm happy to ask, but if you've got a list there, I know that we'd love to hear from you on the questions that people asked.
Let me just off the top speak to a couple of things. And again, I probably would write some of this down and send this to you, Paul and Peggy, and you can distribute it if you like. People might be interested in getting it in writing as well as me verbalizing it. One of a series of the questions pertain to who does what. What's my role as mayor? Where's my starting point? Where's my ending point? And I just this afternoon jotted down some notes on a piece of paper, which if I held up, you could probably see. And the piece of paper has on it council versus CAO and administration. Who does what? Council governs, CAO and administration manage. Council approves the policy statements. Management recommends policies, and then management develops directives. Now, I'll say to councillors, if your policy goes beyond a couple of paragraphs, I'm starting to think that you're now into procedures. And if your policy goes beyond a page, you are into procedures. That's not your business. How we do stuff ought to be your administrator figuring that out. And by the way, if they can't, you got the wrong administrator. Managerial directives talk about what, council talks about what needs to be done. Managerial directives talk about how do we go about getting it done. Council approves the senior level organization structure. How many department heads do we have? That's a council function. Who gets hired into them is an administrator's responsibility, because without that, you have no accountability. You folks are all lathered with the same brush. If something goes wrong with the department head, the question is who's accountable? Everybody's looking around the room like, maybe it's you, maybe. No, the administrator's delighted to look like Pontius Pilate wiping his or her hands, because they know that council is involved in making the decision. And by the way, this is a live issue. I'm involved with the municipality today that's involved in this issue. And council's been sucked in to making decisions around who to hire as the head of you can't trust the administrator to hire somebody. Who do you think they are? Do you think they're bright? Do you think they're intelligent? Do you think we actually hired somebody that knew what they were doing? Oh my goodness. George, no, I got elected as mayor. I used to run home hardware and I used to hire the odd maintenance guy. I know all about recruitment. No, folks, give yourselves a break. I'm not trying to be too demeaning, but give yourselves a break. You hired the administrator. If you get that right, pat yourselves on the back. The council sets direction and priorities clearly. You decide, what are we going to get done in this term of office? What are the priorities we're going to focus on? The administration recommends priorities and projects. That is not their job to decide on them. That's yours. Council decides and resolves any non-policy issues that come to council. The administration recommends what should be done about those. If it's on council's agenda, it's yours. Otherwise, it's an item for information and it should be labeled that way. Council approves the budget. Administration develops and recommends a budget. Now, if you're wise, you will talk about priority setting first and budget second. And because that always makes sense, because that drives what happens in terms of your capital budget. I would argue, by the way, that you should be able to do an operational budget in 1 or 2 meetings. What is it? It's last year plus 1% or 2% or minus 2%. That's what an operating budget is. That's it. The capital budget talks about what are the new projects. In what order of priority are we going to get these done? What's it going to cost us? Where are we going to borrow the money? All that kind of stuff is a council prerogative. The council reviews or requires approval over a certain dollar expenditure. That's in your procurement bylaw, it's in your expenditure bylaw, whatever you call it, and it's also in the CAO contract that says to the CAO, you have the authority to approve expenditures up to $5,000 or $10,000, whatever it is in your community. And I've dealt with communities where it's $1 million. I've dealt with them where it's $500. You have to decide where it makes sense to you and where it doesn't constrain day-to-day decision-making. Anything over that amount comes back to council. By the way, you've already approved it because it's in the budget. So I would always question people and say, how many times does a green light have to go on before you figured it out? It's green. If it's in the budget and you approved it, why does the item have to come back to you the second, the third, and fourth time? Anyway, you got to start asking those questions. Council should approve the HR policy, the personnel policy of the community. What's your policy with regard to how you treat people? Part of your policy is who you recruit as a CAO. Part of your policy talks about how often do we review compensation for senior management. That's a policy. Who implements it? Other than the CAO, the implementation is the CAO. You need a personnel committee to help hire somebody. I talked about that already. The answer is no. One of the most useless committees in Canada is the personnel committee. You only have one personnel. So why would we need a committee to figure that one out? You're there to approve the compensation plan, which is the HR component of this. You're there to say we have an overall compensation plan that sets out a grid system. It talks about whether or not people can get on board when they're hired at step 1 or step 10. We approve the plan and we update it annually. The administration, called the CAO or administrator, is the one that implements the plan that we've approved. There's a series of other ones because I just jotted down stuff that came to my head at the moment, and I'll try to develop that a little bit further and send it off to you if you're interested. So it's a who does what is a critical question. And the whole issue of role clarity, as I said, has been an absolute godsend to me for 42 years. Without all the arguments over that, I might have been retired a long time ago. So thanks to all of you. Carry on and send me notes talking about how you've managed to stumble into each other as you're off at the work site trying to direct the traffic or trying to figure out how deep to put the sewage line. You ever show up at a work site, you want to have 2 things in hand. One's a coffee for everybody and the other's a bag of donuts. Drop them both at the site, carry on. You can pat them on the back as you're going by and saying, well done, folks, and go on. The last thing you want to start doing is telling them how to start digging. If you're going to do that, again, you got the wrong people, I'll guarantee you. What about the code of conduct? I think every municipality in some provinces, and I didn't check Ontario, are required to have a code of conduct, and I think you are. And if you are, then you ought to have certain key phrases in your code of conduct that make it come alive And no, you shouldn't simply take it off the shelf. You shouldn't borrow it from somebody else, in my view. These things should be important to you. And if you need to have a template of what one looks like, again, I'll send you a template. Just make sure you're creating your own. Question with regard to criticism by a counselor criticizing staff. You want to do that? Just see yourself on a teeter-totter with you on the bottom holding up somebody at the top. That's what you're doing with staff. You're sitting on the bottom controlling the destiny and the comfort level of the people at the top. You need to decide, is that a role that I should be playing, or is that a role that should be played by our administrator? If you're trying to criticize anybody, you go in an in-camera meeting and you criticize the CAO. Stop. The CAO will look after the criticism of anybody else. It's not your job to go around the community trying to find fault unless you, in your former life, were a truant officer and you just can't shake it, or you love being a bylaw enforcement person, you can't get out of that headset either. You need to figure out that your role is become governance, not management. You might have managed somewhere else. You might have been the principal, the teacher, the whatever you were beforehand. I'll guarantee you none of that had anything to do with you getting elected. What got you elected is your passion for the community and your sense that you're taking on a different role. Has that always been clear to people? Absolutely not. Public comments. If the public is participating during a council meeting, you need to decide when should they be participating, how comfortable and flexible are we? Do we allow them to interject on every item? I wouldn't. And do we have a question and answer period at the end? I wouldn't. I'd have a question period. In fact, I might even give over a whole evening to a question period. City of Winnipeg does that. They have a whole day called question period, I think it's called. And everybody shows up and the speaker of the council, not the mayor, speaker of the council chairs the meeting and everybody gets up and says their 5 minutes or 2 minutes, sits down, the speaker says, thanks very much, next. If you're having a question and answer period at the end of a council meeting, you really have to ask yourself, who's got the answers? These folks spent 2 weeks figuring out the question. You've now got 2 minutes to come up with an intelligent answer. Don't go down that path, folks. Unless it's what time is the arena open. Anything more difficult than that, you ought to be saying, thanks for the question. It's a very interesting question. We'll take it under advisement. Next. Don't get into debates on stuff that you know nothing about. Somebody else is more equipped than you are. Don't fight in the gutter with people that are used to fighting in the gutter. They're more experienced than you are. And that's, I mean, I grew up on the rough side of town in West Edmonton. I learned how to box. I learned how to run. I did fairly well at both of them. And I knew that I needed both skills because you either needed to start running or you needed to start fighting. I just need to be smart enough to figure out which one to do. You need to decide what skill set is necessary when you're on council. The mayor votes on everything, unless I'm told by Paul otherwise, but the mayor votes on everything. The mayor does not have a deciding vote unless the mayor looks around the table and it goes 4-3 and the mayor says, well, I was the fourth one to vote, therefore I've got the deciding vote. No such thing, folks. You vote on everything. I think the mayor, in terms of leadership, and I mentioned this point earlier, the mayor, in terms of leadership, should say at the meeting, okay, we've got item 3A, the clerk will now describe the recommendation that we have from the administration. That perhaps would be your style. Right, we've got a recommendation from the administration. Do we have a mover? Now, you might need a seconder. I don't know in your procedure bylaw, but we have a mover and a seconder. Yeah, we've got that. Okay, now I can carry on with the discussion. Don't have a discussion and then the mover and seconder, because the period from opening the discussion until the motion is completely uncontrollable. A mayor cannot control discussion until there's a motion on the floor. Just remember that. If you pick up nothing else from me this evening, remember that particular statement. You need to make sure there's a motion out of the gate on every item. It might be changed, by the way, but it allows you to say, sorry, sir, or sorry, ma'am, you're off topic. Here's the topic. The topic is controlled by what? It's controlled by the motion. Nothing else controls anything, folks. Your meetings are going to go on far too long. And some of you, I know, have meetings that go on for several hours or longer. And often it's because you don't have any control, any parameters to the meetings. In terms of decorum, I've got some stuff I could probably send out, but you know, I just wrote something, and I'll mention to you, Paul, and perhaps we could get it out to everybody. But I've got a commitment, series of commitments on basic principles of commitment by members of council. similar to a code of conduct. You could put them into a code of conduct. If folks are interested, I'll send it out. You can circulate that around the council table. These are the commitments I'm making to being on this council. This is the responsibility that I carry. This is how I'll treat others. This is how I'll treat management. The other thing I have, which I could send to you, is called the Council CAO Covenant. I've got an article written about it. There's also a covenant statement. You can sign off of that with your CAO saying, here's how we treat our administrator. It's critical. Here's how we treat the administrator because we respect that person and their position. It's not an easy role, and neither is the role of mayor being easy either. What can the mayor decide? What decisions can the mayor make alone? Well, what time of day to get up? The mayor can decide that. The mayor can decide what to have for lunch. The mayor can sometimes decide who to take for lunch. And if the lunch is related to city or town or district business, you might even be able to have it paid for. The mayor has very limited individual decision-making power. You can recommend to council the appointment to boards and committees. In some provinces, you can decide as a mayor, and I've got a whole series of slides on that one topic. But they're very, very limited. I mean, you have clout. You can stand up, and the moment you say something, you have clout over the community and over the council. I'll guarantee you. So in terms of deciding, what do you need to decide? You need to decide you're going to fire somebody? No, you don't have that authority. Council does. We have what's called the weak mayor system in Canada. It's the system that's the weak mayor system, not the person, unless you make it that way. You're all strong in your own right as mayors. But the way you keep strength is don't fritter it away. Don't be the first person to speak to the item on the agenda. Be the last. Be able to say, well, folks, we've had a really good debate on that controversial topic. We heard on the one hand this, we heard on the other hand that, and I'll be voting this. That gives you a chance to sum up, to sound as I tried to be more intelligent than the rest of everybody else because I now heard what they had to say. So I could sum up and then I could say, you know, on this particular issue, as difficult as it is, I'm going with the motion or whatever. The advantage you have as mayor is that you've heard the discussion of management during what's called an agendas meeting before the council meeting, I hope. If you don't know what that looks like, drop me a note and I'll send you some terms of reference. You get a chance to listen in from the clerk and the administrator. What's the item about? What do we think is going to happen on this issue? You've had a chance to think about it in more depth than anybody else. So you have opportunity to be better prepared. So I think the mayor, in my view, yeah, you can introduce the topic. I'd just be very careful that you don't shoot the whole load. And I think you ought to be thinking about that and be doing that at the end of the discussion, not at the start. You end up losing your ground if you do it at the start. The mayor's opinion. When can you express your opinion? You can do that at any time. Your procedure bylaws should allow you to do that. This notion that you have to step out of the chair to express an opinion is archaic and intention for large organizations. You're not either one of those. So can the mayor express an opinion? Absolutely. Should the mayor dominate the floor? Absolutely not. Should the mayor share the floor with the rest of council? Absolutely. Should the mayor sum up? Absolutely. Get your point across. Just don't be the person that's trying to beat everybody else down as though somehow they ought to defer to you because after all, I got elected as the mayor. If you have to tell people like that it's like Margaret Thatcher saying to an audience of women, if you have to tell everybody else that you're a lady, chances are you aren't. So, you know, people know you're the mayor. They know you got power. They know you have authority. You walk into a restaurant, people know who you are. I walk into a church in downtown Jakarta, Indonesia, at this conference I was speaking at, and sat down in the back row because we got there a bit late. The person sitting next to me, I talk at the end of the service, and they say, "Where are you from?" Because we're all looked like we're from out of town. And the guy beside me says, "Oh, Canada." I said, "Oh, marvelous. So are we, halfway around the world, and we're sitting next to each other at a conference," which says something, by the way, about don't blow it when you're somewhere else. And I said, "Whereabouts in Canada?" And he said, "Well, the Vancouver region. What about you?" I said, "The Edmonton area." He said, "Well, prior to moving to Vancouver 3 years ago, we lived in the Edmonton area called Spruce Grove. Didn't you used to be the mayor?" This is in a community of 12.5 million people, and I'm sitting beside somebody that knows me. Anyway, just be guaranteed that regardless of where you go in life, when you're elected, you know people. Your behavior is on display. You need to look and sound the part, in my opinion. You need to be very careful with that. And you need to have a good set of conduct guidelines, either your code of conduct or these statements that I'm going to send to you. And I'm prepared to answer any other questions that you have, Paul. I think I probably covered enough, and I probably beat everybody down. And I think I've gone past the time by at least 3 minutes, and I'm sure people are anxious to have me get to the end of my own agenda.
Well, I'll tell you, George, yeah, we are a little over time, but one person has left. So I think that's a signal that I'm not allowed to give you the hook yet. So there's a couple questions. 2 questions I'd like your comments on. First is, when do you declare a conflict? When do you declare when you have a conflict of interest? And the other is totally different, totally unrelated, but just get your thoughts on the difference or similarities between the role of a mayor versus the role of an MPP versus the role of an MP.
Yeah, those are 2 very good questions. Conflict of interest, I tell people from a generic non-lawyer point of view. I leave the legal advice to Paul and others, but the non-lawyer point of view, you get up in the morning and you hop in the shower and you get out and you look in the mirror. It's a scary thought, I know. But when you look in the mirror, it's a council meeting day and you say to yourself, is there anything on tonight's agenda that impacts me more than somebody else? There is. That's that item 5 that's on the agenda coming up. And I'm kind of debating whether I should tell people that I've got a bit of an angle on that, or I've been involved in that beyond, or I've got a partial interest. You know, it's a minimal interest. You know, I was a partner, now I'm not. I'm a principal. You know, I get a check at the end of each year. You know, I'm not really involved. My business is 2 doors down from that area that we're looking to rezone. So I'm not really involved. It's not next door. The moment you start arguing with yourself and justifying what you're about to do is the moment you're likely in conflict of interest. You don't need a lawyer to tell you that. You just need what's called the conscience. And your conscience is actually a fairly good and accurate barometer of what's happening between you and the rest of the community. You need to be able to own up before the meeting starts to say to the clerk's office or the CAO, depending on your community, here's an item that I believe I'm in conflict on. I'm going to declare that. I'm going to get up and lead that portion of the meeting. The deputy mayor is going to take over. I'm out. You come and get me when that item's dealt with. Don't stay there. Don't say, well, I think I'll wait and then I'll explain the item and then I'll leave. I've heard that said. No, that doesn't work. Leave it to other people to figure it out. You're not staying to explain anything. You're involved. You're going to put a spin on it and you're going to get nailed. And you need to go home and say to your family, by the way, if I mishandle this, the headline's going to say mayor caught in corruption, mayor charged with fraud. How are the rest of you as family over the dinner table? How would you react to that? Oh, not well, eh? Geez. Well, I thought I could sneak by on this one. I'll give you chapter and verse, folks, of people that have tried what I just said, and it didn't work, and it landed badly, and it destroyed their career, and it destroyed their reputation. For what? You know, you've really got to be cautious. And so understand, if you're thinking it's conflict, talk it. At worst, you talk to your CAO and clerk. At best, you've got some legal counsel available to you as a counselor. And if you don't, you request it. And if you're questioning it, you step out. Because somebody on council who doesn't think you're the best person in the world as the mayor is going to use that one opportunity to undermine you. So don't think you're going to get by with it. And don't think that your sins aren't going to find you out, because that's a really good biblical passage that you ought to hold on to, that they will, and they will by the end of your council term. So don't try to skate past things that you know are wrong or incorrect. That's conflict of interest. I can go on and on about that, but
I want to comment. I want to comment on that before you leave, because I know that you're out in Spruce Grove. In Ontario, we've got a really cool system that the legislature has just put in, as a team, where municipalities are an integrity commissioner. Right. One of the roles of the commissioner is actually to give advice to our members of council about whether or not a conflict. So I would urge people who are on this this presentation, in addition to what George has told you, if you have a question, any hesitation, contact your integrity and get advice from your integrity commissioner. Thanks.
Because I understand it. I understand that if you don't do that and the integrity commissioner is called in, you could end up seeing the wrong side of the integrity commissioner. So it strikes me that I would be, be careful at the outset rather than be painfully made aware at the end of the day. So I accept that advice.
Yeah.
The other question you had is with regard to roles. And I just give you a quick example. I was on the board of the FCM, Federation of Canadian Municipalities. One of the guys on the board with me was the mayor of Regina, a guy named Larry Schneider, might still be alive. Larry said to me afterwards when I was doing some work in Regina, he had gone from being mayor to becoming member of parliament to becoming cabinet minister in the short-lived Joe Clark government. Goes back a few years, but it did happen. And he said to me, George, he said, don't step down as mayor. He said, it's the best position I ever had, the most respected position I ever had. Not MP. Most people haven't got a clue what I did other than national defense and the post office. That was about what they thought in immigration. And he said, MPP, other than education and health, which obviously is a big issue today, but he said most people blew right by that and went to the mayor. And the mayor would direct him into the right position. This little book that I just wrote called Tucker Goes to City Hall, which I think is set up behind me on the table, is one that kind of gets people to think about what level of government do we need to talk to. That ought to be taught in our school system far better than it is, because I think it's fundamental. So no, I talked to the mayor of Nanaimo, BC. I just did some work for them on the island. He said, this is the best transition I ever made, George. I went from being an MLA out in with MPP in your language, out in BC, a very important one in the NDP government. And I stepped down and ran as mayor, got elected mayor. He said, this is the best job I've ever had. He said, people know me. They stop me on the street. They talk to me. And by and large, it's healthy and positive, not always, but they know me. You want to have an impact, folks, you're at the top end of the ladder. Don't listen to the nonsense about using this as a stepping up to go to somewhere else. There is nowhere else. Heaven, that's it. Nothing in between. MP is down. MPP is down. You've got more clout. I realize the premier's got clout, but the chances of getting there are pretty slim. So be the mayor. You're the worship. You're the person respected in your community beyond anybody else. You're respected unless you blow it somehow. You're respected. Our mayor here is respected. He stands up and says something, people listen. Does everybody love him? No. Do they know he's the mayor? Absolutely. You just need to be comfortable being the mayor and then deciding when it's time to leave. And by the way, try to make that decision on your own. It's tragic when somebody else decides for you. And nobody owes you. I remember the person that replaced me as mayor, he said at the end of the first term, he said, well, George, don't you think they owe me a second term? It's a true statement. And I said, they never owed me a second term. Why would they owe you one? You have to earn this time after time after time. How long should you stay? I don't know. I'm not saying. But there is a shelf life. For most of us, except Hazel McCallion.
So I'm going to decide it's not time because there's one more question that I'd like you to answer, George, and and I've seen it a number of times in different versions. The question is phrased, how do you file the duty to ensure the best interest of the municipal corporation as of the corporation and duty to the people who elected you?
You broke up a bit midstream there, Paul, but
I'll try it again.
Try to repeat that.
Again, because it's important. Reconcile your duty to ensure the interests of the municipal corporation as an officer of the corporation with your duty to the people who elected you. And I presume that the contingent of the ratepayer voted for you.
Yeah, I would say that basic to everything is your responsibility to act on what is in the best interest of the citizens as a whole. And in my view, you can hardly go wrong if you've done that. If that's your choice, you go in front of any court system to say, I took what I believe to be the best position on behalf of our citizens as a whole, and that's how I responded, I think you're in good, solid footing. The moment you start putting the interests of what you presume to be the best for somebody else as expressed to you by your CAO or by your clerk or your head of finance, is the moment I think you're on very thin ice. You got to the dance because you convinced a number of folks that you were worthy of the office. You do nothing to lose that worthiness. Otherwise, you're toast. And I think at the end of the day, by and large, those two things should coincide. You've got your relationship to the organization. Yeah, it is paramount in terms of making sure you owe a fidelity to it. But your fidelity to the community, in my mind, would exceed absolutely everything. If you're doing what's in the right of the community, you're doing what's right. If you're passionate on behalf of the community, you're speaking the gospel of the community. If you're starting to figure out, well, I think we ought to do well, you know, the moment you're starting doing that is like conflict of interest, is the moment you start to dance on the hot tin roof, and I think you're in big difficulty. So I would encourage mayors to, in this audience, to be the person of character that you're called to be. Above everything else, you need to shield your administrator and your staff. If you've got problems with them, you talk to the administrator candidly on your own. You expect that person to manage the rest of the organization. If council has difficulty with your administration, with public works, with the fire department, I don't care what it is, you talk to your administrator and say, you know, I'm hearing this and I'm passing it on to you because I know you're an understanding person. You take the action you think is warranted. I'm not telling you what to do, but I'm telling you this is what I'm picking up from my members of council. And then you need to encourage members of council to respect the responsibilities and roles of their chief administrative officer and not go past it. Don't start playing games because this will undermine everything. And then I get called in and I say to council, do you have any trust and confidence in your CAO? And 3 out of 7 say, no. And I say, well, we're done. And they say, well, it's only 3 out of 7. I said, it doesn't matter. It's like water against cement. The rest soon follow, I'll guarantee you. This thing has collapsed. You need trust and confidence. Otherwise, the whole system, I remember doing this review for the Office of the Auditor General of Alberta. Massive department, major review. It's a public document. And they asked me to look at how do CEOs of universities, colleges, special interest boards, 230 of them, how do they get recruited? How do they get compensated? How do they get assessed? I remember talking to the chair of the board of the University of Alberta, and I said to the chair, who's long since passed, but I said to the chair, have you ever had to fire a senior person? Yeah. I said, this matrix that you put in front of me on this table, wonderfully professionally looking matrix of all the responsibilities, all the deliverables. I said, on which one of those have you fired somebody? He looked at it, he looked up and he said, none of them. I said, what caused you to fire the person? He said, a lack of trust. See, I have that in my performance review format that I've developed. I'm not sure what's in the CAMA one, I'm sure it's there, but I think that's absolutely fundamental. Absolutely. You have trust and confidence in the CAO, the administrator, or you're on a very slippery slope. This doesn't work. That's the same trust, confidence that the public should be able to have in you as mayor. You say you go to bat for them, so you work on their behalf. I expect that that's exactly what you're trying to do. You set your ego aside. You do manage to get into the car with your head and body all at the same time. You're capable of understanding that others have gone before you. You're thankful, and you know others will come after you, and you're thankful. We occupy this slice in time, and we're called to do first-class leadership. That's your role. When the book comes out called The Mayor, take a read of it and give me a call or drop me a note and tell me what it is you picked up or what you thought I might have missed, and I'll be happy to hear from you.
Well, thanks very much, George. I really do appreciate it. I know that many people are having to run to council meetings and other things. We'll end it there and to seeing you again in the fall. Look forward to maybe by the time things roll around next year, seeing you in place. So we'll put on our list of wishes after COVID. I just want to say to everyone much for giving us your time. We really do help you be the best mayors and the best municipality and we look forward to working with you. Make sure you please give emails to support@e4m.solutions, that when George sends us the materials tonight, we can send that out to you. Thanks very much, all. Have a great night. Get
Thank you.
vaccinated. Thanks a lot, Joe.
Good night and thank you.